Hello, everybody. Hello, my dear friends and viewers, and welcome to my first live stream on my YouTube channel. Zdravo, moje ime je Rumba Dalijani. Dobrodošli ponovo na moj glavni kanal koji se zove Rumba Dalijan. To je moje ime. So anyway, in this my first live stream, I'm going to talk about the life and the history of the first Yugoslavia. That was the kingdom, and some of the ideas of Yugoslavia, where the idea of Yugoslavia originated from. So we know that Yugoslavia originated, or the ideas of Yugoslavia originated from not the 17th century or 18th century. So that's where the idea of Yugoslavia originated from. And so that was where they decided to create a union of South Slavic states like the Serbs, Croats, Slovene, and Bulgarians, I believe so. And those, they would try to create a union, but that would happen 3 centuries later in the 20th century when they created the first Yugoslavia. So we know that the Balkan Peninsula for 500 years was under the dominant occupation of the of the Ottoman Empire and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So it was under the influences of those two imperial powers at the time. And so basically, and then like other Balkan nations in that region that were occupied by Ottoman Empire would fight for their independence, like Bulgaria, Greece, and Serbia would fight for their freedom or their independence again from the Ottoman Empire, basically. And so Serbia declared their independence after the two Serbian revolutions of the 1800s. There was one revolution in 1804. That was the first Serbian revolution that was led by Karađorđe Petrović. And he was a Serbian revolutionary. He basically liberated Serbia from the Ottoman Empire. And then Serbia was established as Karađorđe. There was a dynasty in Serbia at the time. It was called the Karađorđević dynasty. And then in Serbia, there would be another dynasty. It would be the Obrenović dynasty, and those two dynasties would be like clashing each other. They were like fighting for dominance in Serbia, basically. Those two dynasties, the Karađorđević dynasty and the Obrenović dynasty. So those were two dynasties that were trying to find dominance, or again trying to show off who's better and ruling Serbia, basically. And so, and throughout the 1800s, Serbia had multiple wars with the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire, which is now present-day Turkey. And then there was a war in the 1876 when Serbia was fighting a war with the Ottoman Empire, and then it would end in 1878. So 2 years of war between Serbia and the Ottoman Empire. And then Bulgaria at that time, they would declare their independence, or it would become an independent nation on March 3rd, 1878. That was when it became a principality. And then other nations like Russia, it was an empire at the time, and they were fighting the Turks. With the support of Russia, Bulgaria rebels were helping the Russians fight against the Ottomans there in that period of time. And then in 1881, that was Serbia was made from a principality into a kingdom, and then it would last the kingdom until 1918, when it became the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, also known as the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, Kraljevina Jugoslavije. In Serbian language, that's how you say Kingdom of Yugoslavia in Serbian. And so prior to all these events, Peter Karađorđević, or Đorđe Petrović, he was campaigning against the Ottomans, and then I believe he was thrown. He was captured by the Russians, and he was made a prisoner of war. He was held in captivity, but then one time before he, when he arrived in Serbia in 1817, that was when he was killed. He returned from Russia from captivity, and then he would soon be killed by his opponents, members of the Obrenović dynasty, and then there would be a clash between those two dynasties. And so at that moment in time, uh, then Bosnia was under the Ottoman Empire because they occupied that area for 500 years, and then the Islam religion would spread into some Balkan countries like Bosnia, and then Bosnia's religion today, around 50% of Bosnia's population today is Muslim. Some Bosnians are Muslim, some Bosnians are Christians, basically. And so other countries in the Balkans like Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Greece, and Romania, their religion is Orthodox Christianity. And so in 1885, that was a war started between Bulgaria and Serbia, because that was when Bulgaria attacked Serbia. They wanted to take over Serbia, and then at that time they were defeated. The war did not last for too long between Serbia and Bulgaria. The war lasted from in November, and it ended in November of that same year of 1885. And so Serbia was ultimately defeated, and Bulgaria had successfully won the war against Serbia. And then throughout history, Serbia had a lot of kings. They had Karađorđe, who was the Grand Voivoda. That was Voda. Vođe translates to leader, and so he was the leader of Serbia. And then there was another Serbian leader named Mihailo Obrenović, and there was Miloš Obrenović, and there was a lot of other Serbian kings prior to World War One. And so, and then in the 1900s, there was a change of power. The Obrenović dynasty went to extinction because a Serbian army officer by the name of Dragutin Dimitrijević, he assassinated King Milan Alexander of Serbia at the time, and then together with his wife Draga Obrenović, who was the queen of Serbia at the time. And then the Obrenović dynasty went to extinction, and the Karađorđević became the dominant power of the Kingdom of Serbia. And then he would be replaced by King Peter I, Kralj Petar I in Serbian language. And so at that moment, when the Obrenović dynasty came to power finally in 1901, the relationships between Austria-Hungary collapsed. Relationships between Austria-Hungary and Serbia collapsed, partly because the new dynasty in Serbia developed a relationship with the Russian Empire, which was under the rule of Tsar Nicholas III, who would soon be assassinated in 1918 following the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And that would ultimately kill the Romanov family, and then that would lead to a civil war in Russia. And then all the Communist Party of the future Soviet Union would take power, or the Bolshevik army would take power in Russia, and then Soviet Union would be established. And so, during that time, Bosnia in 1901 was annexed. Then, because no, not Bosnia, Ottoman Empire annexed that area, and it would soon come under Austria-Hungary. It would be occupied by Austria-Hungary. Because if you remember, some parts of Europe, like Croatia, Slovenia, some parts of Ukraine, and some parts of Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic and Poland were under the influence of Austria-Hungary. And so in the 1910s emerged following these events. And so the two Balkan wars would erupt when Turkey declared war on Montenegro, and then a Balkan alliance was formed that consisted of Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, Romania, and the rest of the other Balkan nations there. And so the first war started in October 1912 when the Ottoman Empire declared war on Montenegro, as I stated earlier. And then that war would end in May 1913, so not for a long time, last for almost a year. And then the Second Balkan War would start in June 1913 when Bulgaria, Serbia's former ally, had attacked Serbian army in Macedonia. And then that would start a war, and then that war would ultimately end in August 1913 with the signing of the peace treaty in Bucharest in Romania. And then the first war ended with the Treaty of London. The first Balkan War ended with the Treaty of London, and that ultimately ended the First Balkan War. And then a year later, in 1914, the Serbian economy was in a financial crisis because of the wars. The number of losses Serbia had suffered too many casualties in those two wars. And so the assassination in Sarajevo would take place. That was an assassination on Archduke Francis Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, who was the Archduke, or in Serbian language, it would be Na Vojvode, and then of Austria-Hungary. And Austria-Hungary in Serbian language would be pronounced as Austro-Ungarska. And then the assassination was carried out by a small Serbian terrorist organization and called the Young Bosnia, Mlada Bosna. And then its assassins were Garijevo Princip, who was the key assassin in the assassination of Francis Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. And there was it wasn't a lone wolf assassination. It was carried out by Princip and his other fellow conspirators. And so the reason for this assassination in Bosnia was partly because Serbia wanted Bosnia to be under Serbian rule. That's why they assassinated Archduke Francis Ferdinand in Bosnia. And then Austria-Hungary soon declared war on Serbia, and that would ultimately start World War I, the First World War. And so Serbia, with the support of Russia, would support Serbia in the war because Serbia and Russia are both the Slavic countries, so it kind of makes sense to support each other because they have the same ideology and they have the same religion. But they do have similar languages and similar cultures. So, and then Austria-Hungary, with the support of Germany, would attack Serbia, and that would start World War I. And then there were many battles throughout Serbia in World War I. There was the Battle of Drina, the Kolubara, and Cher. There were many battles in Serbia during that era of time, about 4 years, from 1914 to 1915. And so many people in the Austro-Hungarian army were illiterate because they couldn't read. and the quality of the Ottoman or Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austro-Hungarian army was very not in good quality. And so some of them did not speak German. Some of them were not educated because some of them did not speak German or Hungarian, and the ethnic minority in the Austro-Hungarian army was not. It was not German. It was Romanian, Polish, and it was South Slavs, and the Czechs were in the Austro-Hungarian army during that period. So it was not really German or Hungarians in the Austro-Hungarian army. While Serbia, on the other hand, had believed that with the support of Russia would defeat the Central Powers with or without the help of the other Allied powers, for example, the United States, Britain, and France. And so and the most important battle throughout World War One was in Serbia was the Battle of Tsar. That was basically the first major victory and major Allied victory in World War One. And so after that, then Bulgaria would join the war in 1915 on the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Ottoman Empire, and they would soon invade Serbia successfully, and they would occupy Serbia until 1918 when they were kicked out of that area. So Serbia, after the Central Powers' successful invasion, the Serbian army and Serbian king would ultimately retreat through the snowy mountains of Albania and Montenegro, and they would soon arrive in Greece where their government in exile was established. And then they would fight against the Central Powers from 1916 until 1918 when the war ended with the surrender of German Empire. Sorry. So yeah, and then when Serbia was fighting the Central Powers in Greece, it was also known as the Salonika Front because that was where their headquarters were established. Serbian headquarters were established there, and it was also called as the Macedonian Front, Makedonski Front. And so after 1918, when Ottoman Empire was defeated and with the surrender of Nazi German Empire and Austria-Hungary, the dissolvement of Austria-Hungary, the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was established following that era of conflict from 1914 to 1918. So the Kingdom of Yugoslavia was ruled mostly by Serbs. It wasn't ruled by Croats or Slovenes. So Yugoslavia started out as a kingdom, basically, and it would last for a kingdom from 1918 until 1941, when it was defeated by Nazi Germany and their allies in World War II. And so at that moment, Yugoslavia officially became a kingdom, and then Peter I, who was the previous king of Serbia, would become the first king of Yugoslavia, and he would rule Yugoslavia until 1921 when he died, the same year when the Communist Party of Yugoslavia was outlawed by the royal government of Yugoslavia. And Peter I died at the age of 77, if I recall correctly, and then he would be succeeded by Alexander the second, and so he would rule Yugoslavia until 1934 when he was assassinated in Paris during a state visit in Paris by a Bulgarian terrorist that was organized by the Ustasha. That was a Croatian terrorist fascist organization. And so there was and then a tension would start between Serbs and Croats with the assassination of Stepan Radic, who was the president of the Croatian Peasant Party, which was one of the parties and political parties in Yugoslavia, when he was killed in parliament in Belgrade. And then that would start a huge tension between Serbs and Croats. And then Alexander would be assassinated in Paris in France in 1934, and then he would be succeeded by his 11-year-old Peter II of Yugoslavia, and he was 11 years old when he took power. And so Yugoslavia as a kingdom had a religion. It was Orthodox, and then it was they had churches there. It was very much different compared to the life in Soviet Union, because Soviet Union, it was a communist country, and it was an atheist regime basically, because it did not approve of religion, and they did not worship religion because it was a communist country for almost 70 years of its history. And so Peter II of Yugoslavia would be, and his co-regent was Paul of Yugoslavia, and he would this is awful.